Hi, everybody. I am really sorry that I'm not there today with you to review for your exam, but I am here and going to go over the exam with you via this recording, the exam study guide with you, that is, through this recording. So it is hard to believe that we are here at this and we are reviewing for the very final exam, but that is what we're doing. So if you will pull up your study guide yourself and then follow along with me. And if you do have any notes or any questions, then take notes on those in the margins, and then make a note to go ahead and email me about those questions if something doesn't seem clear to you, and I will be happy to get back to you. And I will be sure to make sure that I get back to you as soon as possible, knowing that your exam is coming up really soon. So if you look with me at the very first page at the top, it tells you that the exam is worth 150 points and it's going to be 15% of your grade. Your grades are already adjusted for the percentages, and that for theology is 45% for major category assignments, 15% for your final, and then 15% for minor category assignments. So that is where the shift and explanation for where things fall. You really should start studying now if you have not already. So go ahead and study just a little bit at a time to review the things that maybe you're a little bit unsure of. So going back through the objectives at the top, those are not things that you necessarily need to learn. Those are things that I told you that I was going to teach you. So if you go back through them, you should be able to go, oh yeah, I remember we did that, or oh yeah, we did that, and those are all the things that I told you at the very beginning that we were going to go over. So looking down at the matching or fill in the blank section, there are a few things at the top that I neglected to take off, and those are the things related to the final unit, which was prayer. And so anything that looks like you're unsure of it, especially those top four terms, prayer, petition prayer, praise prayer, and mental prayer, those won't be things that I would expect that you would know for the test. So don't be too concerned about that, especially if they have to do with prayer, because we just didn't get to cover those, and that's really fine. I'm not gonna worry about that with you. We've actually covered prayer plenty in our class, but we did not get to that final lesson, and those won't be things that you'll see on the test. And I had them on the study guide just in case we had time to cover it, but since we didn't, no worries. Don't get too worked up about that. The other terms, though, are going to be on the test, and you will definitely expect to see them. So it would do you good to look back through your notes and help yourself to find definitions to be able to identify those. And I have at the top for you explanations of how those you'll be tested on those. So if it says matching / fill in the blank in the bold right above the terms, then that means that those terms are going to be part of a matching section or a fill in the blank. So when that happens, you know that the terms are going to be there. You don't have to generate them yourself. So that's kind of helpful to know how much you have to study and just what you have to study exactly. So then we jump into the actual terms. All right, so pain. If we talk about pain in a sense of how we've discussed it in this course, we know that pain is something that is a physical feeling. And then we go to suffering as its kind of foil there. Suffering is something that we can feel that is connected to pain, but suffering is the emotional response that we have. It's how we connect to that emotionally. So pain being the physical, suffering being the emotional. Sometimes we have suffering as a result of pain, but not always. Sometimes there are things that happen that don't cause us suffering that hurt. So that's possible. And again, you can go back through your notes and find these. The passion narratives. The passion narratives were what we have recently studied, and we talked about how that there is an example of the passion narratives in all of the Gospels, and as well as the resurrection narratives. There is a resurrection narrative in each of one of those too, so you would want to know that. The passion narratives tell the stories of Jesus's suffering and death. The resurrection then tells of the story of Jesus's rising from the dead. All right, so a couple other terms in here. Masochism, of course, is when someone gets pleasure from hurting themselves in some way or experiences pleasurable feelings. And remember how we talked that does not have to do necessarily with someone who self-harms, that can be a completely separate thing. So we have to be very careful about labeling others. But in terms of pain and suffering, that is something that we have to be aware of. And then the opposite of masochism being sadism, where someone somehow experiences pleasure from hurting others. And again, both of those disorders are rare. They're not common things. They might be common to you because you've heard them. You watch your Criminal Minds TV shows or CSI, but that's not something that's really common. All right, so then we jump into our evils: moral evil, physical evil, and social evil, and they're not all listed exactly right there in the fill in the blank, but I will kind of group them like that. Of course, you know that moral evil is the actions of one person to go against what they know is what God has taught us, what Jesus teaches us. Social evil then is the same thing. Social evils are moral evils, but they are the result of a group of people or a result of a repeated piling up of wrongdoings. And then natural or physical evil, those are things that happen as a result of the workings of nature. No one's responsible for that. No one caused the tornado. Nobody's bad behavior made the hurricane hit. It just happened as a result of nature. Nobody made your loved one develop cancer or have an accident or anything like that. It is something that just happened as a result of the natural forces. Moving through other things, sacrifice would then be us sacrificing something, meaning giving up something that we value for something else. Martyrdom would be someone who is giving up their life for their faith, somehow gives up themselves for their faith. Let's see, keep on going through here. We know the definition of the Paschal mystery, hopefully you do, and that is the work of salvation that was accomplished by Jesus through his life, his suffering, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension into heaven. The power of goodness, that's from a little ways back, and so you may have to dig for that one, but I will tell you that the easiest way to explain the power of goodness is that it is God's grace, and it is that thing that allows us to triumph over evil, essentially. You can probably get a more definitive answer if you go back through the notes, but that is the basics of it. Redemptive love. Redemptive love is what we talked about related to the Spitfire Grill, and redemptive love is that love that is willing to give up anything, even one's own life, for the sake of saving or setting someone free. Okay, so be real clear on that definition. All right, moving on down the study guide, and I know I'm going kind of quickly, so again, if you have any questions, feel very, very free to ask. The two separate ordered lists. There will be these two, and you just need to make sure that you have them in order. Really pretty simple. Liturgical calendar that we just finished studying. The liturgical year begins with Advent, and then we continue to Christmas. After Christmas, we have a period of ordinary time. So you will have ordinary time listed twice. Even though there appears to be only 6 seasons, ordinary time happens twice. So be prepared to identify when that happens both times. So in this case, if you were numbering them, Advent would be a 1, Christmas would be a 2, ordinary time would be a 3. All right, then after ordinary time comes Lent, which would be a 4. Holy Week is part of the end of Lent, and I just adjusted the test the other day, and I decided to leave Holy Week off of that, even though I do want you to know what Holy Week is. So you wouldn't need to necessarily number it. So Lent would be a 4. Then Easter would be a 5. Okay, so then finally another ordinary time period would be a 6. So hopefully you followed through that. Advent starts the church year. Christmas, okay, then ordinary time, and then after ordinary time Lent, Easter, ordinary time again. All right, so hopefully we're all good with that one. And then stages of grief, that was pretty simple. You guys did really, really well on the test over the unit for that. And that's, I think, because of DABDA, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And a reminder that, of course, those don't always happen in the same order that we memorize them. People a lot of times pop around in their grieving, but that's simply how we're ordering them. Additionally speaking, please make sure that you do know what happens during each of these times. For example, during the liturgical year, know what each of those seasons has to, for example, Advent is the time we prepare and we wait for the coming of Jesus and his birth. know that have a little snippet of each of those. You do need to know something for each of those seasons, and the same thing for the stages of grief. You would want to know that in the stage of denial, it's when someone sort of has this way of separating themselves from whatever it is that really happened in the hopes of lessening somehow their feelings of grief. So that's their mind's way of protecting themselves. So you want to know that. And again, these are all in the notes, but just reminding you of these things. All right, so moving on to the multiple choice section, and for that part, you would need to be able to understand and have a concept of these different terms and phrases. Number one says the Catholic belief about the nature of evil, and it is in the notes, but for whatever reason, I always have people that are kind of questioning this. We talked many times about how Catholics do not believe in this thing called ambush theology. We don't believe that God is hiding behind the bushes, watching us, waiting to either strike us down in the event that we somehow misbehave or reward us when we do good deeds. We believe that God is there at all the times and he's omnipresent, but we also believe that he's there in our times to be strength for us and guidance, and not necessarily a rewarder or punisher. So just that understanding that God doesn't reward and punish based on what we how we behave. That people's morally evil acts are the cause of morally bad actions, and natural forces are the cause of things like natural disasters and accidents and diseases. Number two, where it says, how was Jesus aware of his fate? That connects us to that lesson where we talked about the passion itself and Jesus leading up to his death. He was very aware of death. We remember how we discussed that Jesus, the life expectancy during Jesus's time would have been about 40 years old. There were infant mortality rate, meaning that babies died sometimes when they were young. They sometimes didn't make it very long. If there was not the same kind of medical care that we have now, as well as maternal death rates. People were crucified in public. People were killed in public. And death was a part of these people's lives. So we believe that Jesus was aware that by the choices that he was making, he possibly would be killed. And that, of course, connects us with his humanity, the idea that he wasn't afraid to give up his life for us. He was willing, even though at the very last moment, we know, in the garden, right before he, was handed over to the guards, he asked God, let the cup of suffering pass if it be your will. And then he realized, you know what, no, I know what I need to do, and this is what I'm choosing. So we believe that he was aware of his fate because of those reasons. Number three says, who was the first follower to see Jesus after the resurrection? And when we examine those resurrection narratives, we know that we mentioned lots of different people that were there in the resurrection narratives. People like Joanna and Salome and Mary, the mother of James, and the other Mary. That's always my favorite one, the other Mary. But we give credit to Mary Magdalene as being the first person to see Jesus after the resurrection. So broken window theory moves us down to a couple of units ago. Broken window theory was that concept that's connected to the moral social evils. The idea that there's that propensity for us to look at either crime or misbehavior, and we see that as a sign that these things could be allowed maybe in this neighborhood or in our school or in our culture, in our community. But that if we only were to clean these things up or fix these certain elements, the visual elements, that maybe these things wouldn't be allowed to happen. Similar to how social evils, sometimes we allow those things to get into our environment. It's a theory, of course, and there's lots of people that will challenge this theory, but it does connect to how small things can lead to bigger problems. Small little misbehaviors, small little poor judgments can lead to bigger misjudgments. The passion events. You do need to know those 8 events of the passion, and of course they start out with Jesus' entry into the city of Jerusalem on Sunday. We call it Palm Sunday now, but then it continues with his Last Supper with his apostles, on into the garden at Gethsemane, I've already mentioned, and then the next morning his trial before the Sanhedrin, where the Jewish chief priests and scribes, and then his trial before Pontius Pilate. After this, of course, he was sentenced, so he was scourged, and the scourging is when Jesus was beaten and whipped, and then his crucifixion, and then death. And those are the events of the Passion. You will need to have those in order. You'll need to order those and know what those are. Um, the Gospels that tell the story of Jesus' suffering, you need to know that all four of those are contained, that all four of those contain a passion narrative, and then also that they all contain a resurrection narrative too. Number 7 says morally evil act. Okay, there were two things that I always harped on with you. There were morally evil acts are things that you have to know they're wrong. Like you have to consciously know that they're wrong. I think the direct definition is something about like against one's reasonably well-informed conscience. So if you found that definition, you're on target. And then the second part is to intentionally do it. So again, I think we gave the example in class way back a long time ago, maybe like in August or September, about how a young child maybe that isn't fully aware can't really be morally guilty of a crime like if they find a gun in their parents' drawer, they pull it out and they're playing, they don't have that understanding. So to be morally evil act, you have to intentionally do it and you have to know it's wrong. Number 8 says a cross, and that's just that idea that that's the most universally recognizable symbol of Christianity, and similar to how you did your own crosses. And then I'll conversely, it's not on here, but do know that a crucifix has the image of the crucified Jesus, and that's just another piece. And I think it was on your quiz, so you should absolutely know that. All right, the stages of grief, I just added those there as a reminder to know the different pieces to the stages of grief, meaning knowing that, what is a part of each one of them. Anger causes somebody to lash out against whatever it is that they think caused that grief or that they perceive caused that grief. So those are the reasons why I added the stages of grief down there, just because you're going to need to describe them and pick out things. I'm sorry, I'm going to correct myself. Not describe them, because these are part of the multiple choice. You'll need to be able to pick out descriptions for them in a multiple choice setting. Okay, so that takes us through all the multiple choice. And then lastly is their essay questions. There are 2 that you'll need to choose, and I have given you 4. This is where you can be saying, thank you, Mrs. Mattingly, you are the best, because I've given you the actual questions. You even get to sort of pre-plan in your mind what you might potentially want to respond and how you might want to respond. You cannot bring in your essay already written, nor can you bring in an outline of it, but you can bring in a mental outline of what you wanted to say. And so for that reason, I would even recommend you going ahead and doing an outline for yourself. These are questions that we've discussed in depth in class, so these are not things that should be foreign to you. But I will say with that I would really expect you to do a really nice job on these questions because of that. So I'm going to expect you to intelligently be able to explain to me what the fulfillment of the Paschal mystery was for one of those characters in Stale Magnolias, and you can choose which character. We've hit home on all of them. We've really gone over all of those. And the 6 that I'm referring to would be Clary, Truvy, Annelle, Weezer would be an option, Malin, and then Shelby. Those 6 women. Those are the ones I'm referring to. If you move down to number 2 for the Spitfire Grill, I have that it says recall the definition of redemptive love. You don't need to write the definition there, but it might help for you to explain that redemptive love, or since redemptive love is, and then give me an example. Then you should tell me how you saw that in the movie. Which characters really do you believe embody that, and which one reminds you of Jesus? This is a question that I really lifted right off of your quiz from Unit 3. So definitely keep that in mind, that I'm going to look for you to do a good job if you choose that question. And then number 3, this is a really more personal one, and it's not that I can count it wrong, because everyone has their own experiences of grief. But I would expect you to connect them very specifically and very distinctly with the stages of grief. Now, knowing that, it's very possible that you in your grieving did not go through denial, or you did not experience anger, you skipped it, or you didn't experience it in the same way, that in the same order that we've talked about it. That's fine. However, you should explain that and give a reason for it, so that I know that you know. And so I will look for you to do that. Number 4 says to really look at the Passion events. And I don't often have people pick this question, but the ones that do often do a really nice job with it. I ask you to go through the passion events, and you've already identified them in the test. You should have already, whenever you're taking this, so you can even kind of, use that to help you out with them. But I ask you to sort of think about how they bring you closer to your own faith. Take yourself back through Lent. What were your feelings there, and what are some of the things that you reflect on when you are experiencing your own like penitence, and thinking about how the things that you do wrong help you to do better in your life. And it says, what crosses do you bear, and how have you been able to resurrect them in your life? So it's a little bit of a fulfillment of the Paschal Mystery question for you as well. So what are the things that have challenged you? How have you gotten through them? So that one's, again, it's another one that you can really interpret, but you also still should really direct yourself to the things that we've talked about in class, and the things we've learned. So the only other thing that I will remind you of, even though it is back up here under this Paschal Mystery right here, you do need to be able to completely give me the definition of the Paschal Mystery. And again, we've gone over that many times, but it is the work of salvation that was accomplished by Jesus through his life, his suffering, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension into heaven. You should be able to say that with me by now. So, all right, so this is the conclusion of my review for your final exam. After this, the substitute that's in there with you should go ahead and get started with the Kahoot game, so I hope you like it. It's about 25 questions. It's not super, super long, but it should be kind of fun, and I hope you will enjoy it. If you have questions, absolutely please direct them my way, email me. When you finish the Kahoot game, you can work on your liturgical calendars if you have not finished those, or study on your own, whichever works for you better. All right. Thanks, you guys, and I love you, and I will see you all next week. Bye. That people